My wife sneaked into our son's room every night. I set up a hidden camera. I'd been on the road for 3 days straight, hauling freight across the state, the hum of the truck engine my only companion. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the sky was bruised purple, and the house smelled like baked bread and faint lavender. It should have felt comforting, the place I'd built for my family, but an odd tension crept under my skin. Something in the air felt off, though I couldn't pinpoint it. Inside, everything seemed normal. My wife, Nia, was bustling in the kitchen, humming softly, plating spaghetti for Ethan like it was any other Tuesday. Our 8-year-old son, usually full of energy, sat at the table quietly, eyes downcast. His fork moved mechanically, his small shoulders hunched, and the laughter that normally filled the room was absent. "Hey, champ," I said, dropping my bag by the door. "Missed you." He nodded, mumbling a quiet, "Hi, Dad." Nia smiled at me, but didn't meet my eyes fully. Something in her posture, a stiffness I hadn't noticed before, made my chest tighten. After a long drive, I was usually the one exhausted, but tonight fatigue mixed with unease gnawed at the back of my mind. Dinner passed with polite conversation, but the silence between bites was heavier than usual. Ethan barely touched his food, and Nia's reassurances sounded hollow. "He's just tired from school," she said, brushing off my glance with a quick hand gesture. But the look on her face, the tension in her jaw, hinted at something she didn't want me to see. Later that night, after tucking Ethan in, I heard it, a faint creak of the floorboards outside his door. I paused, my ears straining, and my heart starting to hammer against my rib cage. The sound stopped as soon as I stiffened. For a moment, I convinced myself it was nothing. Old houses make noises, but instinct told me otherwise. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the unease coiling in my stomach. Sleep came in fitful bursts, punctuated by the soft whispers I could swear I heard from Ethan's room. I told myself I was imagining it. I had to be, but every instinct in me, every twitch of dread, screamed that something was wrong. By the next evening, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I walked past Ethan's door just as Nia passed behind me, whispering something I couldn't catch. She froze for a fraction of a second when our eyes met, then moved quickly like she was afraid to be noticed. That split second, the flicker of panic in her eyes, was all the confirmation I needed. I had to know what was happening. I went online that night searching for a small, discreet camera, one that could fit in a corner and capture the whole room without drawing attention. My hands shook slightly when I unpacked it, but I forced them steady. If I was wrong, at least I'd know. If I was right, I needed proof. When I finally installed it, carefully angling it to catch every corner of the room, I felt a strange mix of guilt and determination. I wasn't proud of hiding my own wife's actions from her, but the protection of my son was non-negotiable. I set the camera to record overnight, heartsick anticipation twisting in my chest. Then I waited. The first creak came just past midnight, slow and deliberate. Nia stepped into the room, the dim glow from the hallway casting long shadows. She whispered something under her breath, gentle but urgent, brushing Ethan's hair back from his forehead. I watched, frozen, as she retrieved a small notebook from under his pillow, writing quickly, almost frantically, before slipping it into her bag. I couldn't hear the words, but her urgency, her careful movements, told me more than words ever could. She left as quietly as she came, closing the door behind her. The silence returned, but it was heavier now, filled with unspoken questions. That night, I lay awake on the couch, listening. Every creak of the floor, every sigh from upstairs sent my heart racing. I couldn't bring myself to sleep, not when questions swirled through my mind like a storm. What was Nia doing in Ethan's room? Why the notebook? And most importantly, was my son in danger? By the next afternoon, my anxiety had grown unbearable. I tried to act normal, but Ethan's withdrawn glances and quiet movements made it impossible. He barely looked at me while eating breakfast, and his small hands fidgeted with the edge of his bowl. I wanted to ask him directly what was going on, but something told me he wouldn't or couldn't answer. I watched Nia too. She moved around the house with practiced ease, making tea, straightening books, humming softly as if everything were fine. But her eyes betrayed her. Quick, darting movements, checking doors, glancing at corners. Every time she looked at me, there was a flash of something unreadable. I wanted to confront her, to ask her outright what was happening. But a part of me hesitated. I wasn't sure I was ready for the answer. That night, after Ethan was asleep, I crept upstairs with the hidden camera in my pocket. I double-checked the angle, ensuring it captured the entire room without her noticing. Then, I waited. The soft creak of the door sounded around midnight, and my heart lurched. Nia stepped in, moving like a shadow, whispering something I couldn't make out. She opened the notebook and began scribbling again, her hand trembling slightly. Ethan sat on the bed, silent, watching her. I could see his small shoulders tense, his eyes wide and uncertain. I pressed the record button on the camera and held my breath, unable to tear my eyes away. She leaned close to him, her lips barely moving, whispering words I couldn't hear. Then she closed the notebook and tucked it back into her bag, as careful and precise as a cat on a ledge. After she left, I waited a few more minutes just to be sure, then quietly went downstairs. My hands were shaking, my chest tight with a mix of fear, anger, and sorrow. I played back the footage on my phone, frame by frame, trying to make sense of it. Every movement she made, every whispered word, screamed secrecy. Something wasn't right. The next morning, Ethan barely touched his breakfast again. He gave me a fleeting glance, eyes full of uncertainty, before looking down at his cereal. I tried to speak to him, to ask him how he was, but he just shook his head slightly. His silence weighed on me like a stone in my chest. I wanted to comfort him, to reassure him, but I had no idea how. Nia moved around the kitchen, pretending everything was normal. She served breakfast with the same practiced smile, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the sharpness in her eyes whenever they flicked toward me. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was happening in that room, something she was desperate to hide. By that evening, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I needed proof, not just suspicion. I double-checked the camera setup, ensured it was recording, and waited for the night to come. My stomach twisted with dread. This wasn't just about catching her. It was about protecting my son. And I had a feeling that once I saw what was really happening, nothing would ever be the same again. That night, the house felt heavier than ever. I stayed downstairs, pretending to read, but my eyes kept drifting toward the staircase. Every shadow seemed to move with intent. Every floorboard groan sounded louder than it should. By 11:30, I could hear Ethan's soft breathing upstairs, steady and fragile. And then, as if the house itself held its breath, the faint creak came, the sound I'd been waiting for. Nia stepped out of our room, her movements cautious and deliberate. I held my breath as she passed the doorway, eyes flicking toward the staircase, lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't notice the camera in the corner, its tiny red light blinking quietly, recording every second. My heart thumped in my chest, loud enough I was sure she could hear it if she looked my way. Once she entered Ethan's room, she paused, and I could see her hand hover over the small lamp on his bedside table. She flicked it on, the warm glow revealing Ethan sitting upright, hugging his knees. His eyes were wide, wary, and I felt a pang of guilt for not noticing sooner how frightened he was. She leaned down, whispering something, her lips moving fast, almost frantic. Then she opened the notebook I hadn't seen before. Her handwriting sprawled across the pages, scrawled in tight, deliberate letters, and she wrote quickly, glancing at Ethan as if to make sure he didn't see too much. I watched, frozen, my stomach twisting. What could she be writing? Instructions? Punishments? Secrets I wasn't meant to know? My hands trembled, both from fear and anger, but I couldn't look away. Every movement she made was precise, almost rehearsed, like this wasn't the first time she had done it. I realized then that she had been sneaking in for months, maybe longer, and I had been blind to the signs. After several tense minutes, she stood and tucked the notebook into her bag. Ethan's shoulders sagged, relief flooding his small frame as if a heavy weight had been lifted. Nia's eyes scanned the room one last time, lips pressed into a thin line, before she quietly closed the door and disappeared down the hallway. The house returned to silence, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the tense, waiting kind that made my skin crawl. I replayed the footage on my phone, frame by frame, analyzing every movement, every whispered word I couldn't hear. Each replay revealed something new. The way her hand lingered on Ethan's shoulder, the subtle flinch in his posture, the nervous glance she gave the camera without knowing. I felt a sick mix of dread and resolve. Whatever was happening, I had proof now, and that proof was going to change everything. The next morning, breakfast was eerily quiet. Ethan barely touched his Cheerios, eyes downcast. I sat beside him, trying to offer comfort, but he didn't respond. Nia moved around the kitchen with that same measured grace, smiling when I looked, but never meeting my eyes fully. The tension was unbearable. I knew I couldn't confront her without solid evidence, and now, for the first time, I had it. By that evening, I made a plan. The camera had to stay, recording every night. I needed to know the full extent of what was happening. I couldn't risk missing a single moment. I wasn't just protecting my son anymore. I was preparing for the moment when everything would come to light. That night, I sat on the couch again, watching, waiting, and hoping that whatever horror awaited would finally end. My chest tightened, a combination of fear, anger, and anticipation. The first real night of evidence had passed, but I knew the next ones would reveal far more. I braced myself, knowing that nothing would ever be the same. The nights grew heavier, each one a mirror of the one before. I stayed alert, pretending to read or watch television downstairs, but my mind was always upstairs, glued to that hidden camera, waiting for the next scene to unfold. Each creak of the floorboards made my stomach clench. Each soft whisper from Ethan's room sent a spike of fear through me. I began noticing small, unsettling patterns, tiny details that didn't add up, movements so precise they could only be rehearsed. One night, I caught her lingering longer than usual. She didn't just tuck Ethan in. She knelt beside him, tracing the outline of his face with a finger, whispering words I couldn't hear. His eyes followed her every move, wide and alert, but he didn't speak. And then, just before leaving, she paused, bending low to murmur something directly into his ear. He flinched slightly, shoulders stiffening, and I realized that whatever she was saying was not comforting. I felt a tight knot form in my chest. Something wasn't right. I had known something was off for weeks, but watching this, I felt my worst fears take shape. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I didn't have the courage yet, not without knowing the full story. I didn't want to risk pushing her to cover it up further. Days turned into a week, and I watched, analyzed, and documented every movement. Nia's behavior became increasingly peculiar. She would pause at doorways, glance at corners, check locks, and move with a careful grace that screamed secrecy. She wasn't just sneaking in, she was performing, putting on a facade of normalcy for anyone who might notice. Meanwhile, Ethan's behavior changed subtly but unmistakably. He became quieter, more hesitant to speak, always looking toward the doorway as if expecting her to appear at any moment. He stopped laughing at small jokes, stopped running through the house with the carefree energy he usually had, and when he did speak, it was in soft whispers, almost as if he feared being overheard. My heart broke watching this transformation, knowing I had to do something before it got worse. The camera captured moments I couldn't ignore. Nia's whispered words, the hurried writing in the notebook, the gentle but oddly tense touches she gave Ethan. All of it painted a picture that my mind struggled to accept.
She was hiding something, yes, but what? And why involve our son in it so secretly? By the end of the week, my anxiety had reached a peak. I could no longer watch passively. I started planning the next steps carefully. The hidden camera would remain, recording every night, but I needed a strategy for confronting her, for protecting Ethan, for gathering enough evidence to ensure his safety. Each moment I delayed felt like a gamble with my son's well-being. And then late one night, as I reviewed the footage again, my stomach sank. I noticed something I hadn't before. Her whispered words weren't just hushed, they were almost like instructions. Ethan flinched, his small body tense, and my chest ached with the knowledge that my son was caught in a web I didn't yet understand. Something had to change, and soon.
It was late afternoon when Ethan finally broke the silence, though I didn't realize it at first. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the counters. He had been unusually quiet all day, picking at his food, eyes darting toward every doorway. I tried to make small talk, asking about school, about his friends, about the book he'd been reading, but each answer was clipped, hesitant, like he was measuring his words before speaking. Finally, he looked up at me, eyes glistening with a mix of fear and confusion. "Dad, please," he whispered, barely audible. My stomach dropped. Don't tell Mom I talked." I froze. My mind raced, heart thumping as it might burst. "Ethan, what is it?" I asked gently, reaching for his small hands. He flinched and pulled them back, shaking his head. "I can't. She'll be angry, really angry," he murmured. His voice trembled, and I felt a cold knot of dread tighten in my chest. My mind flashed back to the hidden camera footage, the whispered words, the hurried scribbling in the notebook. All the signs I had seen, the secrecy, the tension, the subtle flinches, were connected. And now, hearing it directly from him, the weight of what had been happening hit me fully. My son was terrified. "Ethan," I said softly, leaning closer, trying to meet his eyes without frightening him. "I just want to help you. You don't have to be scared." He shook his head, tears brimming. "Please, just don't tell her I said anything. I don't want her to get mad." His voice was a whisper, and the fear in it twisted my stomach. It wasn't just ordinary childhood fear. It was a fear born of repeated intimidation and manipulation. That evening, I watched him go to bed, clutching his blanket tightly. I felt a mix of anger, guilt, and determination simmering inside me. Anger at Naya for putting him in this position, guilt for not realizing sooner, and determination to protect him at all costs. I knew that the camera was my only way to get the proof I needed, but now the stakes had risen. I couldn't wait any longer. Later that night, I went upstairs with a flashlight and checked Ethan's room more carefully. The small details became impossible to ignore. His toys were arranged with a precision that wasn't normal. A teddy bear lay on the floor, torn slightly at the seam, its stuffing peeking out. There were faint stains on the fabric that made my stomach churn. My hands shook as I picked it up, feeling the weight of the proof that something was deeply wrong. I placed the bear back gently, careful not to disturb anything, and returned to my couch downstairs. I replayed the footage again, focusing on Naya's movements, her whispered words, the notebook she always carried. Each frame made my blood run colder. I realized that her nightly visits weren't just minor indiscretions. They were part of a pattern, and my son was at the center of it. By the time I finally lay down, exhausted but unable to sleep, I had made a decision. I couldn't wait any longer. The camera would stay, and I would keep documenting everything, but I also had to begin planning the next steps. How to protect Ethan, how to confront Naya safely, and how to gather the evidence I needed to ensure he was never at risk again. The next day, I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me. Every glance at Ethan, every soft sigh he let slip, made my heart tighten. I knew I had to act, carefully but decisively. That evening, after dinner, I lingered near his room, pretending to read while listening. The familiar creak of Naya's footsteps came later than usual, but when it arrived, it carried the same precision, the same quiet intensity. I waited until she had left, then quietly entered Ethan's room. My eyes scanned every corner, looking for signs of what she had done, of what she might have hidden. That's when I saw it. A small, torn teddy bear lying on the floor, its stuffing peeking through the seam. My chest tightened. This wasn't a toy ripped in play. The tears were jagged, uneven, almost deliberate. And then I noticed the faint stains on the fabric, small but unmistakable. My stomach turned, my hands trembling as I picked it up. I had a sinking realization. This bear had been a silent witness to something terrible. I searched the rest of the room carefully, lifting sheets, checking under the bed, moving toys aside. Everything seemed in place, yet the tension was palpable. Ethan's small closet revealed nothing unusual, but the room itself had the air of quiet suffering. I sat on the edge of his bed, the teddy bear in my lap, and felt the weight of helplessness press down. How long had this been happening? How had I missed the signs? That night, I set up the hidden camera in a more strategic spot, angling it to catch every movement near the bed, every whisper, every shadow. I couldn't risk missing anything. The house fell silent as I waited, tension building in my chest with each passing minute. And then it came, the soft, deliberate creak of the floorboard. Naya entered, moving with the same controlled precision. I watched as she leaned over Ethan, whispered words I still couldn't hear, and then, just as I had feared, I saw the pattern repeat. She touched him, lightly at first, then with a firmness that made him flinch, and the small words of discipline I had feared were being repeated over and over. My chest constricted, my jaw tightened, and a wave of cold determination washed over me. I couldn't stand by any longer. The camera caught every movement. I could see Ethan's small body tense with each whispered instruction, each deliberate touch. It was clear now that this wasn't a matter of simple nighttime routines or parental strictness. This was something darker, something manipulative, something that was slowly chipping away at his sense of safety. By morning, I had watched the footage several times, each viewing confirming my worst fears. Ethan's quiet desperation, the meticulous nature of Naya's nightly visits, the notebook she carried like a secret ledger, all of it painted a picture I couldn't ignore. I felt a mix of anger, guilt, and an unshakable determination. My son needed protection, and I was the only one who could give it. That day, I began planning in earnest. I couldn't just watch anymore. I needed proof that would stand up if questioned, that would reveal the truth without putting Ethan at further risk. The camera had to stay, recording every night, capturing everything. And I knew that soon I would have to act, to confront, to rescue, to protect.
That night, I stayed closer than ever to the stairs, the hidden camera tucked in the corner of Ethan's room, recording every movement. The house was silent, heavy with expectation. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat a drum of anxiety I couldn't ignore. Around midnight, I heard it, the unmistakable creak of Naya's footsteps on the old floorboards. She entered Ethan's room with the same careful grace, moving as if she knew every inch of the space in the dark. I watched her lean over him, whispering softly, but this time something was different. Her tone carried a hardness, an edge I hadn't noticed before. I strained to hear through the silence. And then, chillingly, I caught it, the word discipline. My stomach dropped. The whispers were no longer gentle reassurances. They were commands, warnings, lessons in fear. Ethan flinched under her words, curling slightly, trying to make himself smaller. I wanted to storm in, to grab him and run, but I couldn't. The camera was my only shield, my only way to capture what was happening without putting him at greater risk. She picked up the notebook again, writing quickly, her pen scratching sharply across the page. The speed, the intensity, the secrecy. It was clear she had rehearsed these movements, planned every detail, and had been doing this for far longer than I had suspected. My chest felt like it was being squeezed, a mixture of anger and helplessness burning in me. Ethan's small whimpers reached my ears, quiet and fearful. My heart ached seeing him this way. He tried to speak, tried to resist, but his voice was lost in the tension of the room. Naya leaned closer, her whispers sharp and deliberate, and I realized that the discipline this time wasn't physical. It was psychological. A manipulation so subtle it was almost invisible. But the effect on him was undeniable. The night stretched on, every second heavier than the last. Naya finally left, tucking the notebook away and shutting the door quietly behind her. I didn't move for several minutes after the sound faded, my mind racing. I had what I needed, clear, undeniable evidence. But seeing it in real time, seeing the fear in my son's eyes, made the gravity of the situation painfully real. By morning, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. I had watched enough to know I couldn't wait another night. This was no longer a question of suspicion. It was clear that my son was being subjected to something manipulative and frightening. I had to plan the next steps carefully. The camera would stay, but soon I would need to act, to protect him, to intervene, to make sure this pattern ended. I also realized I couldn't confront Naya directly yet. The evidence was my shield, my insurance. I had to ensure that Ethan's safety came first, even if it meant holding my anger and fear in check until the right moment. But the thought of leaving him in that room overnight again made my chest tighten. Something had to change. Soon.
The following day, I felt a sense of urgency unlike anything I had experienced before. Watching Ethan endure those nights, seeing the fear etched into his small frame, I knew I couldn't stand by any longer. I needed a plan, and I needed the right tools. The hidden camera I had set up was crucial, but it needed to be positioned better, recording every angle without leaving any gaps. After lunch, I drove to the local electronics store, my mind racing with 1,000 scenarios. Each passing thought made my hands tremble slightly, a mix of fear and determination. I walked past rows of gadgets, scanning the shelves for the smallest, most discreet cameras, something that would fit seamlessly into the corner of Ethan's room, capturing every movement without being noticed. My fingers hovered over several models, reading the specs, imagining how each one could be installed without drawing attention. Finally, I selected a small, high-definition camera with night vision, capable of recording discreetly and storing hours of footage. It felt heavy in my hand, not from its weight, but from the responsibility it represented. This was more than a gadget. It was my lifeline, my way to ensure that if things got worse, I would have proof to protect my son. Driving home, I rehearsed the installation in my mind. Every angle had to be perfect. The camera needed to be high enough to capture Ethan's bed clearly, but hidden enough that Nia wouldn't notice it. I considered every possible placement: the bookshelf, the corner near the window, even the ceiling. Each scenario carried risks, but I knew I couldn't afford mistakes. That evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, I prepared the room carefully. I moved the furniture slightly,
angling the camera so it would catch every part of the bed, every movement near the nightstand. I tested it multiple times, checking angles, ensuring the lighting captured his expressions without being harsh. I even adjusted the microphone to pick up whispers, knowing that every word could be crucial. When I finally finished, I stepped back and surveyed the room. Everything looked normal to an unsuspecting eye, but I knew the truth hidden within the corners, the shadows, the quiet hum of the camera. I felt a mix of guilt, fear, and resolve. I wasn't proud of having to spy on my own wife, but this wasn't about pride. It was about protecting my child. I double-checked the settings, ensuring the camera would record overnight. Then I sat quietly in the living room, listening for the inevitable creak of the floorboards. My heart pounded as the hours passed. Finally, around midnight, I heard it. The soft, deliberate steps leading to Ethan's room. I grabbed my phone, watching the live feed, my chest tight with anticipation. Nia entered as expected, moving with the same careful grace, whispering words I still couldn't decipher. She retrieved the notebook, scribbling quickly before slipping it back into her bag. Every motion was precise, rehearsed, and deliberate. I watched Ethan flinch slightly under her words, the fear in his posture undeniable. My heart ached, but the camera captured every second. By morning, I had reviewed the footage multiple times, my resolve hardening with every viewing. The evidence was clear. This wasn't a one-time incident or a minor issue. It was a pattern, one that had been going on for weeks, maybe months. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The next step had to be carefully planned. My son's safety depended on it, and I was ready to do whatever it took.
Part 9. The night of the first full recording, I could barely sit still. I stayed downstairs, pretending to read, but my mind was entirely focused on the camera feed. Every second felt stretched, every creak of the floorboard amplified in my ears. I knew this was it, the moment where I would either finally see the full extent of what had been happening or find some small relief that my fears were unfounded. Around midnight, the familiar soft footsteps approached. Nia entered Ethan's room quietly, almost like a shadow. She whispered something I couldn't hear, the words urgent and precise. She moved with deliberate care, closing the door behind her. I felt my chest tighten. My hands were clammy, my heart thudding in my ears. From the camera's angle, I could see Ethan on the bed, clutching his blanket, eyes wide with apprehension. Nia's face was calm, almost serene, but her movements told a different story. She reached over, placing a hand on his shoulder, then moved it down firmly, almost correcting him, repeating the word discipline in a soft but commanding tone. Ethan flinched, his small body stiffening. I could see him shrink under her presence, trying to make himself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. Then came the notebook. She pulled it from her bag and opened it carefully. Her pen scratched across the pages in rapid, controlled motions, writing lines and notes as though she were keeping a record of everything she did. I couldn't make sense of it yet, but the meticulousness was unsettling. Every action, every word seemed rehearsed, like this had become routine for her, like Ethan's fear was part of a plan. The most chilling moment came when she leaned close, whispering directly into his ear. He flinched and tried to whisper back something, but she interrupted with a sharp gesture, shushing him silently. My chest ached seeing it, but the camera captured it all. This wasn't discipline in the way parents correct children. It was control, fear, and manipulation. My blood ran cold as I realized that every night he was subjected to this, trapped in his own room with nowhere to hide. After what felt like hours, she finally stood and left, slipping the notebook back into her bag with care. The door clicked shut, and the house fell into a tense, uneasy silence,
I didn't move for several minutes, my mind racing. I knew I now had the most concrete proof I could get, visual confirmation of her actions, her words, and his reactions. By morning, I had watched the footage multiple times, analyzing every gesture, every whisper, every subtle sign of fear. My resolve hardened. This wasn't about suspicion anymore. It was undeniable. I couldn't wait. I couldn't hope it would change. I needed to plan my next move carefully to ensure Ethan's safety, to gather more evidence, and to prepare for the moment when I would have to act. The weight of what I had discovered pressed down on me, but alongside the fear and anger, a steely determination grew. My son was my responsibility, and now, armed with proof, I knew I would do whatever it took to protect him.
The morning after the first night of recording, I felt drained in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Every movement in the house seemed heavier, the air thick with tension. Ethan sat at the table, barely touching his cereal, eyes downcast, fingers tracing patterns on the plate. I wanted to reach across and comfort him, but I had to be careful, not to upset him, not to tip Naya off, not to risk losing the fragile trust we still had. I replayed the footage again, frame by frame, and my stomach twisted with each passing second. Tape over Ethan's mouth, whispered commands, the notebook. Every gesture deliberate, controlled, rehearsed. This wasn't an accident. It was a pattern, a nightly routine, and my son was trapped in it. I felt my hands shake as I copied the video files onto a secure drive. This was my insurance, my leverage, my lifeline. By late afternoon, I knew I couldn't act openly yet. Naya would sense it, and the risk to Ethan would increase. I needed time, a way to observe, to gather more evidence, and to plan the next steps. That's when the idea struck me. A temporary work trip. If I left town for a few days, Naya would continue her routine without suspicion, giving me the perfect opportunity to document the pattern fully and prepare for intervention. I packed lightly, trying to appear casual, but my mind was racing. I rehearsed every conversation, every excuse. I called my dispatcher, ensuring my schedule allowed for a quick overnight haul out of state. Every detail mattered. The timing, the roads, the stops. The goal was simple: protect my son, gather proof, and prepare for action. That night before leaving, I watched the live feed again. Naya entered Ethan's room, repeating the same routine, her words soft but authoritative. Ethan flinched slightly, curling into his blanket. I swallowed hard, my chest tight, but I knew this was necessary. The camera captured every detail, her whispering, the way she held the notebook, the subtle physical gestures. Every movement added to the evidence I would need to act decisively. As I drove away the next morning, heart pounding and eyes on the road, I felt a grim determination. Each mile took me farther from home, but closer to a plan that would ensure Ethan's safety. I called a trusted friend, Kevin, explaining in vague terms that I needed backup, someone to be ready for an urgent situation. His voice was calm but steady, and he promised to be ready for anything. By nightfall, I was miles away, but my thoughts were with Ethan. I went over the footage one last time before resting in the motel room, each replay reinforcing the urgency. I realized I couldn't wait any longer. This wasn't just about catching Naya. It was about rescuing my son, protecting him from further fear, and ending the cycle that had been quietly building in our home for too long. Back at home, I knew the night ahead would be critical. Even from a distance, I had arranged to monitor the hidden camera remotely. Every creak, every whisper, every subtle movement mattered. I felt a knot in my stomach, part fear, part resolve, knowing that this footage could be the key to protecting Ethan once and for all. That evening, I watched as Nia went about her usual routine. She prepared dinner with practiced ease, smiled at Ethan in a measured way, and then waited until he was settled in his room before moving quietly herself. Her actions were calculated, precise, almost ritualistic. The camera caught it all. The way she paused at the door, the notebook clutched in her hand, the whispering words that made Ethan flinch. I copied the files from the previous nights onto multiple secure drives, ensuring there was redundancy. Every moment of abuse, every subtle gesture, every whispered command was preserved. I knew that in the coming days, this evidence would be my lifeline. I also began planning my temporary work trip more thoroughly, timing it so that I could remain close enough to act if necessary, yet distant enough to allow the documentation to continue without raising suspicion. As midnight approached, I felt a familiar tension tightened in my chest. Nia entered Ethan's room again, repeating the same routine. The soft whispers, the controlled touches, the careful writing in the notebook. It all played out exactly as before, but this time I noticed subtle new details. The way she sometimes paused and stared at him, almost testing his reaction. The small flinch when he shifted under her gaze. Each tiny action added layers to the pattern I was documenting. By the time the night ended and Nia left the room, I felt both exhausted and more certain than ever. The evidence was undeniable. Ethan's fear, the meticulous planning, the whispered commands, it all confirmed what I had suspected. This wasn't a one-time occurrence or a minor mistake. It was a routine, a carefully maintained pattern of control, and my son was living it nightly. I went to bed that night with the drive securely hidden, my mind racing with plans. Kevin was prepared to act, I had the footage meticulously organized, and I had a strategy forming. I couldn't wait any longer. The time to intervene was coming, and I knew that once I did, nothing would ever be the same.
The second night of recording brought the same tension, but this time I watched with an even sharper eye. Every whisper, every gesture, every subtle movement of Nia's hands was etched clearly on the footage. She moved with that same deliberate grace, notebook in hand, soft words flowing in a rhythm that had clearly been rehearsed countless times before. Ethan flinched repeatedly, curling into himself, shoulders tight, eyes wide with quiet fear. My chest ached with each subtle sign of his distress. I noticed details I hadn't fully grasped before. The way Nia sometimes lingered longer than necessary. The quick glances she threw at the door as if checking for someone watching. The way she paused mid-whisper when Ethan tried to respond. Each moment was a calculated assertion of control. This wasn't discipline, it was manipulation. A quiet terror designed to enforce obedience. My stomach twisted with guilt for not acting sooner. By midnight, I realized that patience alone wouldn't be enough. The camera had given me undeniable evidence, and yet the situation was escalating. Ethan's fear was more apparent now. Subtle hints of bruising or tension in his body language, his small whimpers muffled under the blanket. Watching him endure this night after night, I felt a surge of anger and helplessness. I double-checked the footage, ensuring everything was copied to multiple drives. This evidence was my shield, and I had to protect it carefully. Then I began making calls. Kevin needed to be ready. My plan had to be precise. Timing, location, and cover story all needed coordination. I couldn't afford mistakes. Ethan's safety depended on it. By the early hours of the morning, Nia finally left the room, the faint click of the door signaling the end of her nightly ritual. I sat in silence, staring at the recording on my phone. The patterns were undeniable, the intent unmistakable. It was clear now that I couldn't wait any longer. This was no longer about gathering proof. It was about action, rescue, and protection. That night, I made a final set of preparations. The camera would stay one last night, capturing the full extent. but I also started packing essentials in case a swift departure became necessary. Kevin and I had agreed on signals and contingencies. Every detail had been planned: routes, timing, and fallback options. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. My son's safety was paramount, and I would move heaven and earth to ensure it. When morning came, I knew the moment to act was imminent. The evidence was undeniable, the plan solid, and the support ready. It was time to end this cycle, to finally protect Ethan from the fear that had haunted him for too long.
Late that night, my nerves were taut as a wire. I couldn't sleep, couldn't sit still. I needed someone I trusted completely to help me get Ethan out safely. My phone trembled slightly in my hands as I dialed Kevin. "Kevin, I need you," I whispered when he answered. My voice was tight, strained with fear and urgency. "It's Ethan. You have to get him out. Tonight if he can. I'll explain everything, but he can't stay another night." There was a pause on the other end. Then, steady and calm, Kevin said, "I understand. Tell me exactly what you need me to do." I outlined the plan as quietly as possible, my words clipped and careful, making sure Ethan couldn't overhear even the faintest hint of what was happening. Kevin nodded, confirming the details, promising he would act as discreetly as possible. Every word reinforced a sense of urgency in my chest. I could hardly breathe knowing the night ahead would be tense, dangerous, and critical. Meanwhile, I monitored Ethan's room via the hidden camera, seeing Nia move with her usual precision, unaware of the storm about to break. Each whisper, each gesture, each scribble in the notebook was a reminder of how long this had been happening, how much fear my son carried silently every night. My anger simmered beneath the surface, but I kept it locked away. Now wasn't the time for confrontation. It was time for rescue. Kevin arrived at the house quietly, as planned. I stayed downstairs, keeping the lights low, ears straining for any unusual sound from upstairs. I heard the familiar creak of the floorboards, the signal that Nia was making her nightly rounds. My heart raced as I watched the live feed. Ethan sat on the bed, small and tense, clutching his blanket. I whispered his name softly, trying to reassure him, letting him know help was near without alarming Nia. In minutes, Kevin entered Ethan's room under the cover of darkness. He moved quickly, efficiently, calming Ethan with gentle words and soft reassurances. I could see the tension ease slightly on the feed, my chest loosening just a fraction. The extraction was going smoothly. As they left, I followed quietly, making sure every detail of the plan held. Ethan was finally safe, held securely in Kevin's arms, eyes wide with both fear and relief. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The nightmare that had haunted us nightly was finally being interrupted, and the first steps towards safety had been taken. By the time we reached Kevin's car, the adrenaline still thrummed in my veins. I knew there were more challenges ahead, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of hope. Ethan was free from that room tonight, and soon we would begin the next phase, ensuring he remained safe, getting justice, and confronting the truth.
The drive back to Kevin's place was quiet. The only sounds, the faint hum of the engine and Ethan's soft breaths. He sat in the back seat, small and tense, clutching his blanket, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. I glanced at him occasionally, my heart aching with a mix of relief and guilt. Relief that he was finally safe. Guilt that he had endured so much without me noticing sooner. When we arrived, Kevin helped Ethan out of the car gently, guiding him inside. I knelt to meet my son's eyes, trying to convey everything I felt with a glance: safety, love, and reassurance. He didn't speak at first, just clung to the small comfort of my arms. His body was tense, stiff, as though he had forgotten how to relax. "Dad," he whispered finally, voice trembling,
His small hands gripped mine tightly. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. "I'm scared." "I know, Ethan. I know. But you're safe now. I promise." As we sat together, I noticed marks I hadn't seen before. Faint bruises on his arms, subtle scratches on his hands, redness around his shoulders. Every one told a story I hadn't fully understood until now. I felt a wave of rage rise, but I swallowed it, knowing the priority was him. His safety, his comfort. Kevin handed me the drives with the footage from the previous nights. I watched in silence, my stomach churning with every frame. There was no doubt now, no ambiguity. The abuse, the manipulation, the whispered commands, it was all there, captured in chilling clarity. Nia's actions, the notebook, Ethan's flinches, it all confirmed the pattern. I spoke to Kevin in low, urgent tones, explaining the next steps. We would need to involve authorities carefully, ensure protection, and prepare for a confrontation that could no longer be delayed. But first, I needed to focus on Ethan. His small voice, his fearful eyes, his body tense with weeks of anxiety. I guided him to a quiet room, offering him water and comfort, allowing him to start releasing the fear he had carried silently for so long. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of dread lift slightly. My son was with me, safe in my arms, away from the nightly terror. But I knew this was only the beginning. The evidence was solid, the plan was forming, and soon the confrontation and the path to justice would begin. The first steps had been taken, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope amidst the lingering fear.
Once Ethan was settled in Kevin's home, I sat beside him, careful to keep my tone calm and steady. I knew he needed space, but he also needed to start telling the truth, to release the fear he had been carrying for so long. His small hands gripped mine, and his eyes, wide and searching, met mine with hesitant trust. "Dad, I didn't want to get in trouble," he whispered. His voice was barely audible, trembling as if the words themselves were dangerous. I nodded, squeezing his hands gently. "I know, sweetheart. You're safe now. You can tell me anything." Slowly, hesitantly, he began to recount the nights, the words, the gestures. Each detail made my stomach knot tighter. How Nia had whispered commands under the guise of discipline, how she had timed her visits, how he had flinched and tried to hide his fear. The notebook, the patterns, the threats if he spoke. They all came out in fragments, whispered into the quiet room. As he spoke, I felt a mix of heartbreak and rage. My son had endured this silently, living in fear, while I hadn't seen the full extent until now. Every flinch, every tear, every quiet plea made my chest tighten. I held him close, offering comfort, whispering reassurances, telling him repeatedly that none of it was his fault. Ethan's voice grew stronger as he recounted the timeline, the nights she had entered the room, the punishments disguised as discipline, the subtle manipulations that kept him silent. My hands shook as I listened, the full picture of the abuse unfolding in my mind. I felt a wave of guilt for not acting sooner, but I pushed it aside. What mattered now was protecting him, supporting him, and making sure justice was done. I watched him finally relax slightly, small shudders passing through his body as he released weeks of fear. He even managed a small, shaky smile at one point, and I felt a flicker of hope. The fear was still there, lingering, but it was no longer hidden. The truth was finally out. Kevin and I reviewed the footage together once more, cross-referencing Ethan's account with the recordings. Every detail matched: the whispers, the gestures,
the fear. It was undeniable. I felt a mixture of determination and dread. Nia's manipulations had been systematic, deliberate, and cruel, and now we had the proof. I held Ethan close that night, knowing that tomorrow we would begin taking concrete steps to ensure his protection. The hardest part had passed. He had opened up, but the path ahead was still challenging. This was only the beginning of reclaiming safety, restoring trust, and confronting the darkness that had haunted our home for too long.
The next morning, I knew there was no turning back. The abuse was fully documented, Ethan had spoken his truth, and the evidence was undeniable. It was time to involve the authorities. I took a deep breath and called the local police, explaining in careful, controlled terms that my son had been subjected to repeated abuse and that I had both video evidence and first-hand testimony. The officer on the line listened intently, asking questions about the timeline, the nature of the incidents, and the safety of Ethan. I answered as clearly as I could, providing the context, the footage, and Ethan's account. Every detail I gave strengthened the case, and the seriousness of the situation became clear to them immediately. They assured me that immediate protective measures could be taken. Later that day, a detective arrived at Kevin's home. I handed over the drives, explaining everything from the first night I suspected something was wrong, through the careful recordings and up to Ethan's account. The detective nodded, taking notes meticulously, confirming that the evidence was substantial and compelling. Ethan clung to me during the meeting, small hands gripping my arm, but he looked a little lighter, like a burden he had carried alone for weeks was finally being acknowledged. I whispered softly to him, "You're safe now, Ethan, I promise." His eyes met mine, a flicker of trust and relief shining through the lingering fear. The police immediately initiated protective measures. A temporary restraining order was put in place against Nia, barring her from contact with Ethan. The officer explained the next steps carefully, including temporary custody procedures and monitoring. I felt a surge of relief knowing that the first legal barriers were being established to protect my son. That evening, as I sat beside Ethan in the quiet of Kevin's living room, I realized how much we had endured to reach this point. The fear, the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, it all culminated in these first tangible steps towards safety. I promised him we would continue forward, slowly, carefully, but firmly. The nightmare had not ended completely, but for the first time in weeks, there was a path out. I hugged him tightly, feeling both sorrow and determination. We had survived the initial storm, and now, with the law on our side, I could start planning for real long-term protection. Justice would take time, patience, and vigilance, but it would come, and my son would finally have the chance to heal.
Nia's reaction came faster than I had expected. The next day, she received the papers, the restraining order, the formal accusations, and the notification of the temporary custody proceedings. I stayed with Ethan, watching from a distance, making sure he felt safe. Her response was explosive, but controlled in a way that revealed panic beneath a veneer of composure. She called repeatedly, texts flooding in, each one more frantic than the last. Kevin and I kept a careful log, saving every message. She tried to manipulate, to guilt, to frighten, but the protective order held firm. There was no room for her influence anymore. Meanwhile, the court moved swiftly. Temporary custody was granted to me, ensuring Ethan could remain in a safe environment while the legal process unfolded. I breathed a quiet sigh of relief, knowing that the small victories were real and tangible. The legal system now provided a framework to shield him, and for the first time, I felt a measure of control over a situation that had long been chaotic. Throughout this time, I focused entirely on Ethan's well-being. Small routines,
Reassuring words and a steady presence became our anchor. I watched him slowly begin to relax, the tightness in his shoulders easing, his eyes losing a fraction of the constant fear. The first step towards normalcy was underway. I also began compiling everything, the footage, the documentation, Ethan's testimony, to present a clear, undeniable case in court. Every piece of evidence reinforced the reality of the abuse and the necessity of continued protective measures. There was no ambiguity, no room for doubt. Even as Nia's attempts to contest the order continued, her power over our lives had waned. The system now recognized the urgency, the danger, and the need for protection. And though the road ahead would be long, complicated, and emotionally taxing, the foundation for safety had been laid. That night, I sat beside Ethan, feeling a profound mixture of relief and vigilance. He was safe, for now. The journey towards healing had begun, and the nightmare that had plagued our home was finally being dismantled, piece by piece.
It didn't take long for Nia to realize the full extent of the restrictions. One afternoon, she showed up near Kevin's home, her eyes flashing with anger and desperation. I watched from a distance, making sure Ethan remained out of sight, my pulse hammering in my ears. Every instinct screamed to confront her, but I knew that any direct interaction could endanger Ethan or complicate the legal process. She banged on the door, shouting threats and demanding to see Ethan. Kevin and I stayed calm, recording her every word for evidence. The protective order meant nothing to her in that moment, and I realized that she might escalate if given the chance. I made a quick decision. We needed to relocate temporarily, somewhere secure where she couldn't find us. That evening, I packed our essentials quietly, focusing on Ethan's comfort and safety. We left without fanfare, taking a route that minimized the chance of being followed. Kevin drove ahead to scout our temporary location, ensuring it was secure and well hidden. The anxiety was constant, but the relief of moving out of immediate danger outweighed it. Ethan clung to me in the car, quiet and still, his small hands gripping mine. "Are we safe now?" he asked softly. I smiled, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, sweetheart, you're safe, I promise." The relocation wasn't permanent, but it provided the breathing room we needed. Nia's presence, even at a distance, had been a constant threat. Now, with the temporary move, we had space to plan next steps, meet with the authorities, and begin the healing process without fear of immediate confrontation. That night, as I settled Ethan into our new temporary space, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and cautious relief. The legal protections, combined with careful planning and vigilance, had given us a chance to regain some control over our lives. Nia's attempts at intimidation were now distant echoes, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, knowing that we had taken a decisive step towards safety and recovery.
Settling into a small apartment nearby gave us the stability we desperately needed. The space was modest, but it was ours, a place where Ethan could finally feel some semblance of normalcy. I signed the lease quickly, keeping the location discreet to prevent any chance of Nia discovering it. The first few days were filled with careful routines, unpacking essentials, arranging Ethan's things, and creating a comforting environment where he could begin to relax. I switched to a local trucking route, cutting down my hours on the road. The long hauls had kept me away too often, but now I could be present for Ethan, monitor his progress, and respond immediately if any concerns arose. It was exhausting, but the thought of his safety made it bearable. Each day, I watched him regain small pieces of his childhood. The way he laughed at a joke, the way he moved through the apartment without fear, the quiet moments when he simply played with his toys. Therapy sessions began the following week. The therapist was patient, warm, and gentle, allowing Ethan to share his experiences at his own pace. At first,
He was hesitant, eyes darting nervously, fingers twisting the edges of his blanket, but slowly, through repeated sessions, he began to articulate the fear and confusion he had endured. Each session peeled back layers of anxiety and trauma, and I observed him learning, slowly, how to trust again. At home, we reinforced the therapy work with simple routines, reading together, drawing, and talking about his feelings openly. Every small victory, his ability to sleep through the night, a smile that lingered longer than a fleeting moment, a question asked without fear, felt monumental. I took detailed notes of his progress, knowing that this would be crucial both for his healing and for the ongoing legal proceedings. Evenings were often quiet, filled with the hum of the heater, the faint rustle of pages from his storybooks, and the occasional laugh that felt like a miracle after weeks of silence. I realized that rebuilding trust, establishing safety, and restoring a sense of normalcy would take time, but each small step forward was a victory in itself. As I watched Ethan sleep peacefully one night, I allowed myself a moment of relief. We were far from the nightmare that had dominated our lives, but for the first time, I felt a sense of control, a sense of hope, and a clear path toward healing. The journey was just beginning, but together, we could face whatever came next.
During the therapy sessions, the truth began to emerge in ways that were both illuminating and painful. Ethan's therapist explained how the abuse had been more than physical. It was psychological, emotional, and even religiously manipulative. Naya had used subtle threats, carefully worded instructions, and rigid moral reasoning to instill fear and compliance. It was a sophisticated pattern designed to make Ethan question himself, to doubt his own instincts, and to feel responsible for the consequences of speaking up. Hearing this, I felt a mix of anger, sorrow, and guilt. Anger at Naya for her deliberate cruelty, sorrow for the fear my son had endured, and guilt for not recognizing it sooner, for being away on long hauls while this was happening right under my roof. I realized that even with the best intentions, absences had allowed this control to persist. The therapist explained that Ethan's reactions, the flinches, the withdrawn behavior, the whispered pleas were common in children subjected to prolonged manipulation. It wasn't just discipline gone wrong, it was control, a calculated effort to dominate his mind and spirit. Hearing it articulated so clearly brought a heavy clarity. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of rage and determination fueling me to protect him even more fiercely. We began implementing therapeutic techniques at home, rebuilding trust, encouraging open communication, and creating a predictable, safe environment. Every time Ethan responded positively, every time he voiced a fear or asked a question without hesitation, it felt like reclaiming a piece of his childhood. I also confronted my own feelings. The guilt and self-blame were heavy, but I knew that dwelling on them wouldn't help Ethan. Instead, I transformed it into resolve, to be present, attentive, and proactive. Each night, I reflected quietly, planning how to support him, how to document progress, and how to prepare for the ongoing legal challenges. By facing the psychological aspects of the abuse head-on, I could finally understand the full extent of what Naya had done. This awareness allowed me to not only support Ethan's healing, but also arm myself with the knowledge and evidence needed to ensure she could not manipulate or harm him again. The anger, though intense, became a tool, a fuel to protect, to fight for justice, and to reclaim our lives.
As the weeks passed, it became clear that Nia wasn't going to accept the restrictions quietly. Through her lawyer, she began building a case against me, attempting to challenge the custody arrangement and cast doubt on my credibility. Every message, every document, every call was an attempt to manipulate the system and regain control. I realized that while we had immediate protections in place, the legal battle was far from over. I began documenting everything meticulously, Copies of the video footage, records of her texts and calls, detailed notes on Ethan's behavior, and progress reports from his therapist. Each entry was precise, dated, and stored securely, evidence that would become vital if she attempted to discredit me or interfere with Ethan's safety. Kevin continued to support us, helping to track and secure communications, coordinating safe routines, and acting as a witness where necessary. Every precaution was taken to protect Ethan from further exposure, while ensuring we were prepared for any legal escalation. Meanwhile, I continued to monitor Ethan's emotional and physical state closely. The therapy sessions revealed progress, but also lingering effects of fear and manipulation. I reinforced the boundaries, emphasizing that his feelings were valid and his safety was my top priority. Slowly, he began to regain confidence, asserting small choices for himself and trusting in my presence. Despite the stress of the legal threats, I kept a steady routine, balancing the need for vigilance with the goal of creating a normal, comforting environment for Ethan. I met regularly with our lawyer, ensuring every detail of the case was documented and ready for presentation in court. The intensity of Nia's legal maneuvers only strengthened my resolve. Her attempts to regain control were clear, but with the evidence and documentation in place, we were prepared to counter her claims decisively. Every action I took was about protecting Ethan, preserving his safety, and ensuring the truth would prevail.
The day of the court hearing arrived, and I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. Kevin stayed close, providing quiet support, while Ethan remained in a safe, supervised space. Every moment counted. Every detail of the evidence mattered. We had prepared thoroughly: the video footage, the therapist reports, and my detailed documentation of Nia's actions and threats. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Nia's lawyer attempted to downplay the abuse, framing it as minor discipline and questioning my reliability. I remained calm, presenting the evidence carefully, explaining the timeline, and emphasizing the consistent pattern of manipulation and fear Ethan endured. The video footage spoke for itself, showing nightly routines of control and intimidation. The judge reviewed everything with careful attention, asking detailed questions about the therapy sessions, the documentation, and the measures taken to ensure Ethan's safety. It was clear that the court recognized the seriousness of the situation and the need for ongoing protection. By the end of the hearing, the protective order was upheld. Nia's visitation privileges were suspended, and the court mandated that she undergo professional treatment and monitoring before any consideration of contact with Ethan. Relief washed over me, tempered by the knowledge that vigilance would still be necessary. The system had acknowledged the abuse and enforced tangible steps to prevent further harm. Leaving the courthouse, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. Ethan was safe, his well-being prioritized, and the legal framework ensured that Nia could not continue her manipulations unchecked. Kevin and I drove home quietly, the weight of the ordeal still heavy, but with a clear sense that the immediate danger had passed. That evening, I sat with Ethan in our small apartment, feeling his hands relax in mine. The court's decision provided a layer of security, but more importantly, it gave us the space to heal, to rebuild trust, and to reclaim the small joys that fear had once overshadowed. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to imagine a future where Ethan could grow up safe, supported, and free from manipulation. The nightmare wasn't entirely over, but the law had sided with truth, and that truth gave us the foundation to move forward.
In the weeks that followed, I watched Ethan begin to reclaim pieces of his childhood that had been buried under fear. Nightmares that had once haunted him nightly became less frequent, replaced by dreams of normalcy and safety. I noticed small changes: The way he laughed more freely, the way he explored his toys without hesitation, the gentle curiosity returning to his eyes. Our days settled into a predictable routine: mealtimes, play, homework, therapy, and quiet evenings spent reading or drawing together. Each day brought small victories, and each victory strengthened the bond between us. I made sure to celebrate them no matter how minor they seemed, because they were proof that healing was happening. Therapy continued to guide him through the psychological impact of the abuse. He began to articulate feelings he had never voiced before, expressing anger, confusion, and eventually relief. I listened attentively, providing reassurance, support, and validation. Slowly, he started to trust again, not just in me, but in his own perception of safety and security. Even outside therapy, I watched him interact with the world with growing confidence. He joined a local soccer team, made friends at school, and began to engage in small social activities that had once been impossible. Each moment, each smile, each confident step reinforced the reality that we were emerging from the shadow of fear. Though vigilance remained essential, the new normal was taking hold. We could leave the apartment without tension, sleep through the night without constant worry, and enjoy simple pleasures without fear of intrusion. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of stability, of safety, of progress that was tangible. Sitting beside Ethan one evening, I realized how far we had come. The trauma was still present, a shadow in the background, but it no longer defined us. Healing, resilience, and a return to normalcy were possible. Together, we had survived the worst, and now we had the chance to build a life filled with trust, love, and hope.
2 years later, the changes were remarkable. Ethan had grown stronger, more confident, and healthier, physically and emotionally. School had become a place of joy rather than fear, and he excelled both academically and socially. He played soccer regularly, made friends, and even shared small adventures that filled them with pride. Watching him flourish was a relief and a joy I hadn't thought possible during the darkest days. We had moved into a larger home, a space where he could truly feel safe and free. The apartment that had once been our temporary refuge now felt like a distant memory, a reminder of how far we had come. The therapy had continued intermittently, helping Ethan process residual fears and teaching him coping strategies that empowered him to navigate challenges confidently. Naya had faced legal consequences for her actions, mandated to complete treatment programs, and monitored closely. The protective order remained firmly in place, ensuring that Ethan's safety was no longer in question. The justice system had acknowledged the severity of the abuse, providing a framework that protected us and prevented further manipulation. Life had regained a rhythm. Morning routines were calm, school preparations were cheerful, and evenings were filled with quiet laughter or shared stories. I found myself able to focus on work, family, and the small joys that had been overshadowed for so long. Kevin remained a steadfast support, ensuring that Ethan felt secure and loved in every interaction. Reflecting on those years, I realized that the fear and anxiety we endured had transformed into resilience and vigilance. We had survived, and more importantly, we had learned the signs, the patterns, and the steps necessary to protect our loved ones. Watching Ethan thrive, finally free from fear, was the greatest reward of all.
Sitting quietly one evening, watching Ethan play in the yard, I reflected on everything we had endured. The fear, the abuse, the sleepless nights, and the painstaking steps toward safety. The journey had been brutal, but it had also been illuminating. I had learned to recognize the subtle signs of manipulation, the quiet patterns of fear, and the importance of vigilance and action. I wanted other parents to understand that sometimes danger isn't obvious, that warning signs can be small yet insidious. Trust your instincts, observe closely, listen carefully to your children, even when the truths they share are difficult to believe.
and act swiftly, documenting, protecting, and seeking help. No child should have to endure fear alone. Ethan's laughter echoed across the yard, a sound that once felt impossible. Seeing him thrive, seeing him regain his confidence, his joy, and his innocence, it was a gift beyond measure. The fear that had once overshadowed every day had faded, replaced by safety, love, and stability. Though the scars, both his and mine, would never completely disappear, we had transformed them into strength. We had survived the darkness, fought for justice, and reclaimed our lives. And for that, I was profoundly grateful. To anyone listening, know this: vigilance, courage, and unwavering love can protect, heal, and restore. Our story is a reminder that even after unimaginable fear, hope and safety are possible. And now, as I watch my son grow with trust and joy, I know that the nightmare has ended, and that the future, though uncertain, holds promise. The journey was long, painful, and testing, but in the end, love and persistence prevailed. And that is what I hold on to every single day.